when we as adults often fail to meet our own expectations with respect to that. And yet we're holding these children to this. It's insane.
It is insane. That's one of Ryan's self-governing principles. I will not require better behavior from an adult, myself included, than I will not require better behavior from a child than I will require from an adult.
Hello, welcome back to Raising Men. Today, we're exploring what it really means to raise boys who are emotionally safe and connected, especially when they come from hard places or carry hidden trauma. My guest is Ryan North. He's the co-founder of One Big Happy Home. He's a host of their podcast and a leading voice in trauma-informed parenting. Ryan, thanks for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's good to be with you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Ryan, before we talk about strategies, can you just share what first led you into this field?
Yeah, so I'll try to do like the 1 minute answer for a 30-minute story, but I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't fascinated by people's motivation. I remember as a child going to sporting events and wondering why people dressed the way they did. And so I think because my mind's kind of wired for why, anything in the realm of psychology was always going to be an option. And so a lot of trauma-informed care falls under the umbrella of developmental psychology. And so that's sort of the way my mind's wired. But then the way I am wired collided with my reality, because my wife and I are parents to 6 children, 4 of those 6 adopted from the child welfare system in Texas. And so trying to understand them in ways that we could help them and recognizing that raising kids not born to you is different than raising kids born to you, and trying to get all of the help and the equipping that we got. And then we knew somebody who said, look, once your life's 55% settled and 45% chaotic, you're in a place where you can help somebody else. And so we kind of took that to heart. And once things started to settle just a little bit at the house, we just educated, equipped, and started speaking and writing and teaching on trauma-informed care to help adults create spaces where children feel safe, welcome, and loved.
I love that. Explain. So how would you explain why this approach matters to every parent raising boys, not just people who are dealing with sort of the unique situations that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so that is a great question, because, at our house, like I said, 4 of our 6 kids were adopted from the child welfare system. And we made the decision early on in our parenting that we were going to parent everybody the same way. And it wasn't some deep philosophical issue rooted in our enormous intellect. It's just too much to keep up with having 2 different parenting styles. And so what we learned in the midst of all of that, because in the realm of trauma-informed care and connection-based parenting, one of the foundational principles in all of that is having the supremacy of the relationship be obviously the thing that you're driving for. A lot of parents want compliance from their children, but this methodology talks about building the connection and working on that relationship. One of the things we have to guard against is people say, well, that just sounds like permissive parenting, but there's a lot of data on how being a permissive parent is really bad for your kids. And so we have to navigate that, saying, look, there's a lot of nurture, but there's an equal amount of structure. And what we found is that's just been a really, really great recipe for raising kids who are connected. Now, the real value in that is when there is trouble in their life, when they're struggling with something, they'll come to you rather than hide it from you. And we found all of my kids are teens or older. I have 2 in their 20s and 4 in their teens, and I've discovered that connection first idea is raising the kind of people that we want to release as adults into the world.
Yeah, and I think that notion, I think it gets maligned a little bit, because it can also be a cop-out, right? It could be I'm just going to let my kids do whatever I want because it's more important that we have a connection than I ever discipline them. But it's actually not the case that it's way easier and it takes way less work to give the connection that primacy. You actually have to do a lot of hard work to create the boundaries that, create the edges of the sandbox
Yeah.
so that because you can't just whip them into shape. They have to be able to find the boundaries themselves and test them and still not exceed them,
Yeah,
right?
so that's one of the things I tell parents of middle schoolers and teens a lot is part of them figuring out who they are and how they fit into this world and finding out what they're good at is through the process of pushing boundaries. And so that's a natural part of human development, is pushing boundaries. We just don't like it when we're the recipient of said boundaries being pushed, right? Uh,
Right.
but one of the things that I had to reconcile a long time ago is that the point of parenting is not to make my life easy. The point of parenting is to develop another person. And so when you kind of reframe your thinking like that, you will understand that when you're operating in the best interest of somebody, yes is a good word and no is a good word too. We try to, our rule in our house is we say yes when we can, and no if we have to. And
Yeah.
so that's also eliminated trying to be a parent who's trying to make their life as convenient as possible, because sometimes saying yes isn't the easiest thing to do. But unless I have a good reason that is in the interest of your development, I try really hard not to say no.
I have found that to be surprisingly difficult,
Yeah,
and I try to do that as well. But my reflex is, when my boy comes to me and asks me for something, my reflex is almost always to say no.
that's absolutely right. And then we wonder why the toddler, one of your 18 to 22-month old child, says no to you a lot. Well, you've mentored
Right.
it right into him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a tough thing, and I had to put a rule to myself, exactly the same kind of thing. I had to assign a rule that said, "No, I always say yes." And then I need to have a good reason to say
Yeah,
no.
and one of the other ways we look at that, Sean, is we say, does saying yes allow us to build a deeper and stronger connection with the child? Now,
Mhm.
again, one of the ways that I illustrate this is if you have a baby. I don't know if you remember having babies, but you likely swaddle them, right? And sometimes we call
Yeah.
those baby burritos. And then so you make your little baby burrito. And one of the reasons that, unless there's an underlying medical issue, the child's ill or has some sort of medical condition, swaddling a baby will invariably cause them to settle almost immediately, because it
Yeah.
illustrates the principle of what the child needs. And that is that the child needs the security of being held tight by the blanket, but also simultaneously the nurture of being held tight by the blanket. And so
Mhm.
we now realize that kids need equal levels of nurture and structure to develop optimally. And what that typically looks like, in the simplest form, is yes represents nurture and no represents structure. So yeah, my kids hear no, but they only hear it. No, that, I lied to you. I try to make it that they only hear it when no's in their best interest.
The
Yeah,
aspiration is
yeah. I
no,
mean,
right?
obviously, sometimes I just, it's 9:30 at night, and I just want to watch the hockey game.
Yeah.
Kind of that's how it went last night. But
I like that metaphor with the swaddling, because I found, my experience is that giving them reinforcing that connection is what allows them to feel comfortable exploring the world and pushing
yep,
the boundaries. And so it's like, when they're a baby, they need to feel, they need to be really, really tightly wound, and then they can feel free to look around instead of complaining and crying and being worried. And then that just continues all the way until they're adults, where they need to be able to ground themselves in that connection so that they can feel comfortable doing what it is they want to do and expressing their
yeah. So
independence.
attachment researchers talk about needing a secure base, right? And so
Mhm.
that's a trust based issue. And once the children come to realize that you are a trusted adult in their lives, they can confide in you, and then they're having that secure base actually is what allows them to explore the world. And
Yeah.
so, we've over the years had some criticism from some friends and family members about the way we've parented our children, particularly not using what we would just call traditional family methods with the bio kiddos. But I will tell you today that my 17-year-old daughter, she works at a fast food restaurant, and gets home at about 11:30 at night from her shift on the nights that she works.
Wow.
And she comes home, she puts her food that she's taken for her dinner in the fridge. She walks into our room, kicks her shoes off, and climbs into the bed between me and my wife and just tells us about her day. And then she goes and eats her dinner. And
I love that.
and I wouldn't trade that for anything, right? Because I know a lot of
Yeah.
people who their complaint is, well, my kids don't speak to me. My 17-year-old's
Right.
always in her room. They don't let me in. And I'm like, well, the time for creating that relationship where they trust you and let you into the universe is not when they're 16. So when they're 16 months or younger, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so we have now been doing this for long enough and raised enough kids that I think we're now seeing proof of concept in that as they turn 21 today, my oldest daughter, my 23-year-old son, as they go off to school, as they move out of the house and have their own apartments and their own jobs and pay their bills and all the things that sort of are base level adult functionality for me, to see them, and then the struggles that some of them had early on and some of the predictions that the psychologists made about their lives. Our oldest son, we were told, he was almost 4 when he was placed with us, and we were told in a pre-placement meeting that we need to know what we're signing up for, because he'll never ever be able to live on his own. He'll never be able to live independently. He's going to live. He's going to have to live with you. And
Right.
I guess I was young enough and brazen enough, and I just looked at my wife and I said, "Challenge accepted." But
Yeah.
today he's 23 years old. He lives in his own apartment. He has a car that he paid for. He has a job which he has been promoted several times the last few years. He now is an operations director for a company that I don't know. Can I mention brands on here, Sean? Yeah, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
he
Please.
works for a company that owns multiple UPS stores, and he's at 23 the operations director of all of their stores.
That's
Yeah, and
incredible.
that's the kid who I was told 19 years ago would never be able to live outside of my house. And so I would make a
Wow.
strong argument that the connection first, trying to develop him for his good and preparing him as somebody who can function as an independent, contributing member of society, because that's kind of our overarching theme here.
At the end of the story, that's the
Yeah, and so
goal,
I
right?
think we're living sort of proof of concept now.
What are the lessons that we can take from, you've dealt with the kids that have really, really severe emotional
Yeah.
wounds and traumas. I feel like I don't have to deal with that, but my kid has much smaller traumas, and I suspect that the strategies and tactics and techniques that I need in order to deal with those smaller traumas are just miniature versions of the things that you deal with in a much bigger
Yeah,
scale.
so there are a lot of things that I think there's a lot of things that I know that we believe in error about children. I'll give you a couple of examples. Sometimes when I'm speaking at an event, I like to play this game with the audience to prove that we already have this built-in view of how we view children. And I'll say, I'm going to start a
Okay.
sentence and I need you to complete it. And I'll say, children should be seen. And then the crowd yells back, and not heard. I brought you into this world, they yell back, and I take you out. You could have completed all of those. And I have several of those that I do. Well, one of those are all horrible ways to look at children. One of the
Absolutely.
things that I think we do in error about parenting is we think that go big or go home is a great parenting strategy. It's not,
Right.
because if you have to employ go big or go home, you invariably going to then do the next step, which is leverage their pain points to get them to comply. And that is
Right.
literally the antithesis of how to build a good relationship with a human being. We also believe that children are resilient. And I would say that human beings have the capacity for resilience, and that in order to be resilient, you actually need to be connected to somebody who cares deeply about you and helps you in your interest. Because once we believe that children are resilient, we tend to ignore the fact that children are fragile. And so
Right.
now that kind of brings it into the realm of general parenting, not just trauma informed parenting, because the world's a hard place, right? Being a child today, I would argue, is the hardest it's been being a child for a long, long time. I'm not going to discount what it was
Absolutely.
like being a kid at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when 8-year-olds were in coal mines. Not to do that.
Right. But certainly in our
Sure,
lifetimes, it seems like it's way
yeah, I would
tougher.
argue that post World War One, it's the hardest version of the world to be a child. And sometimes we
Yeah.
parent children the way we were parented. And I don't know how old you are. I was born in 75, but I would certainly suggest that the parenting strategies of the mid 70s and mid 80s are not effective at all today, because my parents didn't have to deal with anything I have to deal with today, right? The new
Right.
one, AI chatbots as boyfriends, right? I mean, I read something this morning that 31% of teenagers say they'd rather be in a relationship with a chatbot than with an actual human.
A- That's
That's
terrifying, and it
terrifying.
also makes perfect
It's
sense.
terrifying.
It makes perfect sense because the chatbot will never. I mean, it just blows
It doesn't
smoke.
disagree with you.
It's just thrilled and just reinforce everything you want to believe about
Yeah.
yourself.
And so I can see the appeal of that, but
Yeah.
full third of teenagers surveyed said they'd rather have an AI significant other than a human one. Well, that
Wow.
is, if you don't think that's terrifying, I can share my email and we can jump on a call and unpack why that's horribly terrifying. And some of the reasons it's terrifying is when you look at the research connected to anxiety and depression related to screen usage, particularly amongst girls. Now, this phenomenon of the AI companion is overwhelmingly girls with AI robots than with AI boyfriends over boys with AI girlfriends, right? And so when
Is
we
that
look at
right?
that, and so now they're more in the screen thing. And when you look at one of the great resources for this is Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, because he talks about a lot of the research and there's a lot of charts and graphs in it. But
Yeah.
the enormous increase, the exponential increase in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide amongst teenage girls is astounding. My parents didn't have to counter the influence of a computer telling me what to do and that it's okay to eat batteries or whatever. A lot of these things are coming out now.
Right.
And so what we have to understand is that the world's a difficult place. And we have to understand that this generation of children lives in the AI world. They live in the social media world. They live in a post-pandemic world. When we talk about complex developmental trauma, we do add screens and post-pandemic because that changed how they relate to people. And so to say that we live in a trauma-free world would be rather foolish. And to say that
Yeah.
there's a single human being that has not experienced some level of adversity. And sometimes we use the words trauma and adversity interchangeably because trauma scares people. And it's also an easy one for
Hmm.
them to dismiss because they said, well, my child is born to me, everything's fine. But the reality of
Yeah.
the world is these kids are getting bullied online, in person. They feel alone and isolated in ways that generations haven't before. And so it's now more important than ever for every single parent to understand connection first parenting principles while also understanding that we're not playing the permissive game. You're the child's parent,
Yeah.
not their friend. Don't try to be their friend. Be their parent. You can be their
Yeah.
friend when they're 25, but don't be their parent when don't be their friend when they're 15. You're just their parent.
You talked a lot, earlier. You mentioned about kind of the traditional discipline that you and I grew
Yeah.
up with, right? Which is really focused on control, and you essentially postulated a different model that focuses on connection instead. But I can imagine that people who might be resistant to that might feel that they were losing authority. What do you have to say about that?
Do you have enough time?
We got all the time
All
you
right.
need.
So I would say a couple of things about that. If you constantly have to be reminding your children that you're in charge,
Uh,
then they know what you suspect. You're not in charge. And people who have experienced adversity need predictability and stability, right? Anything that's not predictable or unstable causes them to dysregulate. Well, children, whether they come from adversity or come from the perfect childhood, they still need to feel like somebody's in charge. And so my home is not a consequence-free environment. My home is not
Mhm.
one where lessons aren't reinforced, but it's also one where those lessons are explained that they're for the benefit of the children. I'll give an example. We have some pretty hard rules around screen usage in our home, including that past 10 o'clock in the evening, and even with the teenagers, past 10 o'clock in the evening, the only screens that are permitted in our home are big television screens. So phones and tablets and laptops go night-night at 10 o'clock at our house, unless you have a paper due or whatever. Obviously, we're reasonable people.
Something
Yeah,
special.
and
Yeah.
so our son, who because of his particular trauma set and some of the ways that has impacted his brain, is really, really prone to addictive behavior. If he likes something, he will want it all of the time, and the biggest villains in his life are sugar and screens. And so I have to tell him, look, it's 10 o'clock. We need to put our phones away. And he'll go, why? Now, I will tell you that part of connected parenting, particularly the older the children get, but we did this pretty early on with them, is they are entitled to understand why they're being required to do something. Now, my
Yeah.
parents would never, ever agree with that principle, that you should explain yourself to a child. But I want the child to understand our reasoning behind it. And so our son's been struggling, and he also struggles with math. And I said to him, look, the reason that you keep engaging that phone is over time lessening your ability to concentrate, and also lessening your ability to think creatively. There's studies on this now. These aren't my opinions, right? They found that the
Right.
teenage boys that play an excessive amount of video games tend to lose their ability to be problem solvers, and they're less intelligent over time. And so I said, look, I don't want you to struggle with math, but even more than that, I want you to be successful one day. I want you to have the kind of job you want. I want you to be good at that job. I don't want you to be beholden to the fact that you can't think for yourself because you could not put your phone down. And as a result of that, I'm going to need you to give me your phone to me at 10 o'clock at night. He didn't like it. He thinks I'm ridiculous because, teenage boys have that privilege of thinking their dads are ridiculous.
Yeah.
I know I did. I guess you probably thought your old man was ridiculous when you were 17. But I still very calmly last night had to explain that to him, because at midnight, as I was making sure the house was all shut down before we turned our light out, I discovered he was just downstairs on his phone. And I'm like, no, dude. And he's like, I didn't see what the big deal is. And I explained to him for like the 100th time, this is what it's doing to your brain. And I'm trying to help you here. And you can be mad at me if you want to. That's your call. But I really hope you won't, because I'm not interested in raising, I'm not interested in being a contributing factor to an adult who has a capacity for personal growth and success. Do you know Jimmy Carr is the British comedian?
I do. Very, very
Yeah.
funny. I really like
Have
Jimmy
you
Carr.
heard? I saw him in an interview. This wasn't part of his stand up. I think he was on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And
Okay.
he said, here's the thing you need to understand about parenting. Anybody can say yes. But if you're saying yes to what kids want, then you're saying yes to ice cream, video games, and staying up all night. But what you need to say yes to is what they need: doing their homework, eating their vegetables, and doing chores around the house. He said, because if you keep saying yes to what they want, you're mortgaging their future. And this is what he said: if you keep feeding kids video games and ice cream and letting them stay up all hours of the night, in the future, you will have fat, lazy, stupid people. But if you make them eat their vegetables, make them do their homework, and teach them how to do chores around the house, in the future, you will have raised intelligent, responsible adults. And so that's the real battle you have to fight. Are you trying to have compliance in the moment, or are you trying to raise a successful human being? And I think that's where we get lost, because what's shifted over time is we see more and more in parenting. Permissive parenting is kind of the sexy version of parenting now, particularly in the social media age, where, you go through TikTok and every fourth video is a mom and her daughter doing a dance together because they're friends, right? And so,
Yeah.
but when we were kids, compliance was brought by threat and coercion. Now
Right.
compliance is brought by just saying yes constantly. Well, giving somebody what they want all of the time will not do anything. They won't like you more. They won't be happier.
Yeah.
You know, you can't always get what you want, like Mick Jagger said, and you certainly shouldn't either.
Yeah. You're not mature enough to
No,
know what you should be wanting. And it's your job as the parent to get them to learn that lesson.
you know,
And you're not going to learn that lesson by being overly
I never
communicative.
said no to ice cream when I was 10. I rarely eat ice
Yeah.
cream now because my doctor told me I have to stop high amounts of sugar intake.
Right. I love this story that you told about your son and the phone at midnight. Um, I I would have absolutely flipped out in that circumstance. I don't get very angry very quickly, very often. But when it's something like that it's just a fundamental, like, it's like finding rot in the foundation of the
Yeah.
home or something like that. That would drive me absolutely nuts. And part of what I really like about that story is you didn't have that reaction. You were kind of a model of calm presence in that circumstance. And I think that was probably a really important aspect of the way that you dealt with that situation. You obviously could not have been happy about it.
No, not at
And
all. Not at
yeah,
all. But
and
so this
go
is
ahead.
why this is kind of why over time I have I'll say trained myself to respond like that, because
Yeah.
what often the reason parents flip out in that situation, based on what I've observed and what I've been told by parents that we work with, is that the child's defiant, and we have to stomp out defiance at every opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Parents typically come down really hard on what they deem to be defiant behavior and what they deem to be dishonest behavior. That's the double D of parenting distress: defiance and dishonest. And so, but what I realize is it's not defiant behavior from him. I think that it is the behavior of somebody who's literally addicted to his screen. And so if I had a child that I discovered they had a drug problem, I would engage them kindly and I'd cut off their supply. And so now I
Yeah.
have to think about it that way. I engage him kindly
Yeah.
and I want to cut off that supply. But there's a second level to the way I've chosen to interact. And that is because I need him to see that the appropriate response when encountering something that you don't like, that you disagree with, or is against your wishes and instructions, whatever on that spectrum, right? Whatever's on that spectrum, that you can engage it thoughtfully and respectfully, because he's still a human being who is worthy of being treated with respect, even when he does things that I don't like. And so I want him to learn that that is how he then will one day engage his wife, his children,
Yeah.
his employees, his coworkers, his friends. And so for me, to always, if we can always create a situation where we're addressing the behavior with kindness and understanding, but also mentoring how somebody should act in that given situation, then I consider that a win ultimately.
I think the reflex that I would have that I need to train myself out of is to withdraw connection,
Yep.
almost as a shaming activity. And what you're saying is no, this is an opportunity to reinforce the
Yep.
connection and still enforce the boundary.
Yes, because what happens is we do use that shame that you said as we leverage it. We withhold affection from people who, even on the worst day in your parenting journey, with the most rebellious teen you can possibly imagine, that child still inside of them seeks connection to you. There have been people who've argued over the years that poor behavior is a way to get a parent's attention. Well, if that is true, then you should learn from that we need to do more things together. Like I said, it's my daughter's birthday today. We're going out for dinner, and then her and her mom are going to some tattoo parlor, and she's getting her like 9th piercing or whatever. But yeah, when she got her nose ring when she was 17, I think, and her and my wife got their noses pierced together as a connection activity. Now, if you knew my wife, Sean, you would know that when I met her, on the list of things I was convinced I would never see is her with a nose piercing. But, she did it. They
Yeah,
have fun together. And I think parents take themselves too seriously. And I think parents
sure.
take their children's behavior too personally. We always
Yeah,
act like the behavior we're dealing with is meant to give us the middle finger. And I'm going to tell you that half
absolutely.
of the time, your child's behavior, you were not factored in at all.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just doing what it feels like they wanna
Yeah.
do, and it is not it's not some scheme.
Well, I mean, in that.
I remember feeling that way about the baby when he was crying, and I felt my reflex was I felt like he was trying to manipulate
Yeah.
me, and I had to beat that out of me, like, this is a baby. He's not trying to he's just hungry or in pain or
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean, babies cry for a very limited, unless, again, the caveat always being, unless there's
Yeah,
an underlying medical condition, but they cry because they're
right,
hungry, they're lonely, they're tired, or they need a clean diaper. Right? It's a real
right.
short of needs that babies have. And then to have somebody say that a baby is manipulative. I-
Yeah, but that's what it feels like. In the moment, it feels like you're getting manipulated. Oh, they're trying to do this long-term game, and it's just not the case. And it's not the case when they get older either.
it's not.
They're just doing their
Well,
thing.
I mean, think about human beings, right? We all have needs, and we all try to get our needs met. And then we, over time, if we cannot get our needs met in a healthy way, we will enact maladaptive strategies to get our needs met. And so
Right.
here's what I mean by that. You have financial resources. So if you're hungry, you'll buy yourself some food. But if you don't have any money and you don't have anybody who can help you, and your options are be really, really hungry or steal, you can be the most moral person on the planet. And I guarantee you with complete certainty that you will steal food if you ever find yourself in that situation, because
Yeah.
you have a need for sustenance. And over time, when positive and healthy strategies, buying food, depending on your family or your friends, strangers, whatever, local community organizations, a church, whatever it is, right? If those resources don't give you what you need, then you will eventually steal food. Well, what we don't remember about children is they're exactly the same way. And so,
Mhm.
plus, but except for two things, they don't have the resources that adults have to get their needs met. So they head for maladaptive pretty quickly.
Yeah.
They also don't have the cognitive function to kind of think the problem through. It goes from
Right.
and then the third thing is children, and adults do this too, but children more than adults confuse needs and wants. And
Yeah.
so now something you want becomes something you need, and then you will do whatever you need to do to get that.
Yeah.
Um, and so the negative outcome of that is that children get their needs met by their behavior, then they will increasingly engage in behavior to get their needs met, rather than if they get their needs met with their words, they will increasingly use their words to try to get their behavior met, which is why you have to pick up their need met, excuse me, which is why you have to pick up a crying baby, because the cry is the only way the baby communicates that he or she has a need. Well, if you let the baby cry it out, which is one of the worst pieces of parenting advice of the last 30 years, just let the baby cry it out. If you let the baby cry it out, the baby will eventually learn that their need doesn't go away, but their need's also not met. And then they start
Yeah.
associating you as the person who doesn't meet their need. And the relationship is harmed in very, very serious ways by simply letting the baby cry it out. Now, do you need to stand next to the crib and pick the baby up the moment they go, no, of course not. But if you hear a baby cry and you can give it a minute to see if he or she will settle, and then you go in there and pick him up, then that's fine, because that allows them that they had distress, but somebody relieved their distress. And over time, they can learn that you can be trusted and that their voice has power. Well,
Mhm.
once we teach somebody that their voice doesn't have power, then you see all the behaviors you don't want to deal with. Which
The behaviors
yeah,
have power because the behaviors always have
behavior
power.
will always have power, because at some point somebody just won't want to deal with it anymore, right? My
Yeah.
younger brother's like this. Yeah, when his youngest daughter was young, she was a pretty demanding little kid, and she'd want something and he'd say no, and he'd want something and he'd say no, and then every time she wanted it, the intensity of the ask increased, and wanted it, and eventually, when he'd had enough of her behavior, he just yelled at her and told her she could do what she wanted. And my wife has my wife's a good sister-in-law because she has a pretty good relationship with both of my brothers. And she pulled him aside one day and she said, all you're teaching her is to yell to get what she wants, because you give her what she wants in any case. So what's the point of saying no?
Right. You might as well say yes in the
The
beginning.
only lesson learning here is if I scream and throw things, I get what I want. Well, if that lesson is taught and reinforced over time, then we go to screaming and yelling things way earlier than we used to, because it's how we get what we want.
That's what works. Yep. You know, so we've talked a lot here about focusing the primacy of the connection. And there's another side to the kids' needs too. And they need the connection, and they need that basis of connection, but then they also need independence.
Yes.
And there's a tension between those things, right? You know, you can't be fully connected to somebody and also be independent, and vice versa. And so how do you think about that? And how do you cultivate the independent side of that coin?
Well, attachment research tells us that somebody cannot be fully independent if they weren't once fully dependent. So dependence is a prerequisite for independence. Knowing that you can depend on somebody is what allows you. We talked about that earlier with the secure base, right? You can go into the world and be you if you know that there's a landing place for you. Well, if you don't trust that the adults who raised you, because I know not everybody who's raising kids are raising kids born to them, right? We've got aunties and uncles and grandma and grandpa raising kiddos, as well as adoption, foster care families. If they don't learn that you are somebody who they can depend on, then they won't feel the security to try to be themselves. Well, there's a real problem with having adults who are not independent, because what happens is they seek validation in others. They cannot function without the high fives. And what happens is if you have that view of the world, you tend to, over time, and I know I say over time a lot, but we have to think about things in the context of over time, not in the moment.
Right. Yeah.
Over time, you start making some really bad decisions because you don't make decisions that are in your own self-interest. You don't make decisions that are in the self-interest of your community or your company or your family. You start making decisions that will get people to like you. And now you're not an independent person because you're beholden to the ideas and whims of others.
Yeah. And think about the horror of that. The only way that you can feel safe, the only way that you can feel good at all, is completely dependent upon what other people do.
That's true. And so the way I think about that is we don't use the phrase "be nice" in our home. We kind of we kicked that out of the home vocabulary, a decade ago, because the word "nice" the concept of nice always implies that you have to do something to make somebody else happy. Like, so you got a kid who has a toy.
It's a good observation.
Yes, you have a kid who has a toy, and they have a sibling who wants to play with said toy. And kid A, whose toy it is, doesn't want kid B to play with their toy. When mom and dad will say, "Oh, be nice to your brother and let him play with your toy." Well, so what does that mean? In order to be nice, you have to give in and do what other people want you to do. Well, that's a horrible parenting philosophy, and it's a horrible sustaining democracy philosophy, if you will. And I don't mean to be super theatrical or even sound political, but what happens is that when you're nice, you roll over, but when you're a good man. So we want to raise, this is the context of raising men over here. We want to raise good men, not nice men. And sometimes we think of the same, but good men, not to sound, all ancient world, but they will stand in the city gate and defend that which they are responsible for. Nice men will
Mhm.
avoid conflict and step aside and let all manner of evil into their community. And so
Right.
that's what I want. I'm trying to raise men who are a 23-year-old now and a 17-year-old who'll be 18 in January, who are good men who will run into burning buildings when there's a fire to save their neighbors rather than take out their phones and film the building burning so they can get likes and views on social media. And to me, that's a real simple example of the difference of what we're trying to do with our boys, as opposed to maybe what's happening now in the culture at large. Is we got too many people who want to capture the moment because it might lead to a shoe deal from Adidas because of their views on social media, rather than saving
Yeah.
actual human lives who are in a very, very terrifying situation.
Yeah, I think that is a really good observation. And yeah, I mean, it's our role as a parent is is to to give our sons the skills to
Yeah,
thrive in the world. And when we want them to be, as you say, you want them to be good men. And what does that mean? That means that they're a good provider. It means that they're a good protector. And beyond that, that's kind of the ball
that
game.
is the ball game. I asked my wife in front of my boys. I said, "Babe, do you have doubt in any way that I would jump in front of a bullet to save your life?" And she immediately said, "No, I do not." And
Yeah.
I said to my boys, because being a good man means that you do protect, you do provide. My wife has zero doubt that she means the world to me. My children have zero doubt that they mean the world to me, but none of them, and they don't always like it. But I will gently push back on things that I think, man, if we could just do this differently, then we'd reap the benefits. And they don't always like it,
Yeah.
uh, but my job is not to be liked. My job is to raise good men and women and girls who know one day when they are out of my house to know what they want for themselves, and to know to look for good men. Because we
Yeah.
need people who are interested in investing in subsequent generations, as in order to preserve the world we want to live in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just in order to thrive, as if you're a young man today and you don't, and you sort of, you give in to the addiction of your phone, and you fall into all of these pitfalls that nobody even, I mean, they didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, these pitfalls. You're not, I mean, you're not going to look back on your life when you're 30 or 40 and feel like you're thriving.
Yeah,
And that's really scary. I mean, that's how you get the statistics where, 4 out of every 5 suicides is a male.
yeah.
And that's
Well,
terrifying.
and the interesting thing about those suicide statistics is when you look at suicide statistics in the United States, they're almost
Yeah.
identical in the United Kingdom. And
Right.
so it's not an American problem. It is
No.
arguably, and I don't know if there's any statistics on this from the Eastern world or from developing nations, but I do know in the Western world that it is
Yeah.
a I don't want to say almost exclusively, but over time it shows that, and it's also men like in their 40s too, if I remember looking at the stats correctly. It's not that it's teenage boys, right? It's
Right.
people who get to that midlife crisis. If 45's midlife, I don't know if that is anymore, um,
Right.
but and you start going, well, because the way you were molded, raised, trained, mentored, and then the decisions you made as a result of that, you start having you've lived long enough, and I'm 50 now, so I can speak with some authority of what it was like being 45. I remember my 40th birthday was really difficult for me because I just felt funky. I won't say depressed because that's obviously a clinical diagnosis, but I felt
Yeah.
down because
I know what
because
you
I
mean.
started because I started thinking to myself, have I done as much as I wanted to? Have I done enough? Have I
Right.
contributed anything? And my wife is somewhere between a gentle spirit and a straight shooter. She is a native of Texas, so she has no choice in the straight shooter department.
Right.
But I don't know if you know many Texans, Sean, but
I do. I grew up in
that's
Texas,
true.
and my wife
Yeah,
is native
yeah.
Texas as
So
well.
yeah, I forgot that you told me that. My apologies,
Yeah,
but you know what it's like. And so she
I
said
do.
to me, "Look, you need to feel sorry. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Snap out of it. You've done things that mattered. We're not coddling this today."
I
Yeah, that
love
makes
that.
her a good woman, not a nice one.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does. What I love about that statement is it wasn't just, rub dirt on it, go. She gave you what you needed
yeah,
to. She, you've done good
yeah,
things. So stop pretending that you haven't
yeah.
and stand up and go do
We
your
don't want to
thing.
deal with mopey Ryan today.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you make yes, ma'am.
I love it. Finding a good partner is such an important aspect of this journey.
Yeah,
And it is, I can't imagine how much more difficult parenting would be if I didn't feel like I had someone who had my back.
yes.
And I feel, my wife has got to feel the exact same way. And I just can't imagine how much more difficult it would be. And a lot of people don't experience that. And so, like, cultivating a good relationship with your partner and it begins at the outset when you select that person, but then cultivating that relationship over time, it's so
Yeah, I
critical.
mean, and it holds in so many aspects of life. I was watching an interview with oh, who is it? Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, the guy from the Shark Tank, the Canadian investor, and he was being interviewed,
Yeah.
and he said that the most important financial decision that you will ever make is choosing who you marry. And the
Yeah.
interviewer said, "Well, make that make sense for me." And he said, "Well, think about it. If you build wealth over time, and then you get divorced because the marriage didn't work, fifty
Right.
percent of your wealth's gone, plus
Yeah.
50% of your earnings are going to go as well in the future." And he said, and if you just kind of do some rough back of the napkin math, um, divorce will cost you 67% of your wealth over time. And he said, and any financial investment where you're going to have a negative return of 67%, nobody engages in it. So, so,
That's
so
right.
he said you have to choose very, very wisely who you marry, because they have to be
Yeah.
somebody who complements you. They have to be somebody that challenges you, and they have to be somebody who's willing to invest in you. And one of the great things about our marriage is my wife and I are bothered by different things. And
Uh-huh.
so if one of the kids is doing something that's just really getting her hot under the collar, I can say, "Hey, I got it." And if they're doing something that's
Yep.
really, working on my last nerve, she's like, she'll just like put her hand on my shoulder and start talking. And we made some agreements outside of the moment when everybody was emotionally regulated. That if that
Yeah.
if somebody was just losing it, and one of us put the hand on their shoulder, calmly interjected, or said, "Can you go to the store and buy me a pineapple?" Which is our little. If your spouse says, "Can you go to the store and buy me a pineapple?" that means I've already pre-agreed that I'm exiting the discussion. And so we used that for a long time until the kids figured that out. And then, our smart mouth, now 23-year-old, when he's a teenage boy, walks into the room and says to his mother, "Mom, I
Go
think
get
you
the
can
pineapple.
get a pineapple."
That is really
Yeah, that
funny.
put two people in the line of fire that day, not just one.
Oh man, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, but you also have to kind of appreciate the ingenuity there. You have to get mad a little bit, but you also have to go, you know what? Excellent. Touche, my
Yeah.
friend. That was a really
I
good
can
shot.
assure you that
Uh,
after the fact, she thought it was clever.
yeah, yeah. I my wife and I have a similar dynamic
Yeah.
where one person needs to tap out and the other person sees that and says, okay, I got this from here. But we don't have a really healthy way of doing that results in the person who's dysregulated leaving the engagement feeling good about it. It's it it it, it happens organically. And so the person who leaves the engagement might feel shame about it. So if I'm, freaking out over the kids and my wife says, I got this from here, or she's go take a walk, then I feel like I failed, or I feel like I've done something bad. But this pineapple strategy that you have, it's a pre-existing condition, and it enables the person to parachute in and say, I've got this, in a way that allows the other person to escape with their dignity intact, or without feeling like, oh, this is a failure. It's like, we acknowledge that this happens all the time, and so this is how we deal with it, and it's just part of the process.
And so we did the pineapple thing because it's intentionally semi-disarming, because it's random. And so
and it'll jolt you out of the moment,
because your brain pays attention to new information, and so that's new information. Plus, also, it's completely unrelated to whatever discussion's going on, right? We've never had an argument in our house about pineapples, and so we felt like that was a pretty safe one to do.
Yep.
Of course, now that I've told you that, I'm sure we'll have a pineapple.
I know, now you're going to start having arguments about pineapples all the time.
I'll email you and let you know that, and thank you for that. But the other thing, I like your phrasing there, pre-existing condition, and so we discussed these when we regulated, and we discussed them in the moment. And so one of the things we've learned, and maybe this is easy for us to learn this because we run our own business, but you have to think of your family as a business, and because we have to manage the kids, we have to manage schedules, we have to innovate, we have to do year-end bonuses, or as we call them, Christmas gifts at the house. We have to manage calendars. As you imagine, when all 6 kids were living at the house, between theater productions, sporting events, school and social stuff, we were basically just an Uber service. And so we have to be able to manage those things. And so, my wife and I will have meetings. Sometimes it's on Sunday night, sometimes it's on Monday morning over coffee, just thinking about the week, where we have business meetings, if we have upcoming travel, all those kinds of things. And you use the word partner for your wife a lot. And I think that when we sit down and have those discussions and talk about what we want for our family, my wife and I know what our goals for our family are. One day, when they move out of the house, they will call us and say, hey, are we doing Christmas at your house this year? That's it. Yep. Because I know a lot of people whose kids begrudgingly go to mom and dad's house for Christmas because they just don't want mom or dad to be mad again.
Right.
But we've never done it with our children. We're doing something for New Year's. Well, I want to go with my friend. Okay. Well, tell me who's going to be there. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Have fun. We've never forced the kids to be around us. And as a result of that, we now have children who willingly choose to be around us because we worked on the relationship. Here's the other thing, because I do want to make sure that anybody who listens doesn't just dismiss this conversation as those are the words of a permissive man. But one of the things that we need to understand about parenting is that behavior is caught at least as much as it's taught. And so we often think that if we just sort of treat parenting like a college lecture and we just explain what you need to do, then we're going to have the best results. Well, we know that children who grow up in houses where adults drink alcohol are more likely to drink alcohol. Children who grow up in houses where people smoke, because you tend to become what you see, right? People who were yelled at as children, their parenting go-to move is yelling to get compliance, right? We tend to go with what's mentored into us, what's taught to us. And so one of the things that we did early on in this idea to try to build a healthy relationship with the children is we started apologizing to them when we were wrong. Now, a lot of people will still tell me they're not apologizing to their children. And I try to convince them that they should do that. But over time, I've realized that the hardest thing to change is somebody's belief system. And so before you change their belief system, you have to consider that belief system was likely once an opinion. But you can't even change their opinion. What you have to do is you have to try to change their perspective. And
Yeah.
so the best way I know to change your perspective is to tell you, hey, we tried this for 10 years. Here were the results. I'm not telling you what you need
Right.
to do. I'm just telling you what worked for us.
Yeah, here's my experience.
Yeah.
And take it or leave it.
And so we would apologize. And so at our house, the apology had a formula. Say that you are sorry for the very specific thing that you are sorry for. Don't say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you yell at the children and you know you shouldn't have yelled at them, you go and you say, sweetheart, I am sorry that I yelled at you earlier. And then you also ask them, would you please forgive me? You admit what you did, you say you're sorry, and you ask for forgiveness, and then you also commit to trying to do differently in the future. And so we never taught that formula to our children. All of my children apologize like that now. Will come to us unprompted and say, Daddy, I'm sorry that earlier I yelled at you when you came to talk to me. Will you please forgive me? Just like that. And the only thing we actually taught them is when somebody says, I'm sorry that I yelled at you, or whatever they're sorry for, you don't have to say, that's okay. Because oftentimes we'll just say, that's okay. But I want my children to learn, for them to validate and endorse being treated poorly. So you can say, thank you. Yeah. Thank you is a perfectly polite response.
Thank you for apologizing.
Boy, you should see how that unsettles adults when my children say thank you. I remember one time there was an incident at this school. They do like a co-op thing. They're on campus a couple of days and at home the rest of the time. And in one of the classrooms, there was an issue, and it bubbled up to my wife's ear. So she took my daughter and said, look, you have to apologize to your teacher. And so this is one of the, unprompted at the house, had to prompt it there, because they tend to experience a little bit more shame with people they're not connected to. And so she went to the teacher and she said, I am really sorry that and before she even got to own her behavior, the teacher said, oh, it's fine. And my 10-year-old daughter, 10 at the time, said, but I really need to apologize. And she said, oh, no, honey, you don't. It's fine. And my wife said my daughter was getting really, really frustrated. And a 10 said to her teacher, look, I behaved poorly in class. I need to apologize and ask your forgiveness. Why won't you let me? And so that was a proud daddy moment, because now my children understand that I'm sorry. Right. Let me say it this way. Relationships are never without rupture. There's never a time when your wife, no matter how much she knows that she loves you, there is never going to be a time when she never, ever, ever is annoyed by you, frustrated by you, mad at you, doesn't want to speak to you. Those are the realities of relationships. But if we can, once we've done something to rupture the relationship, we go back and repair the relationship. That teaches people that they matter, because because apologizing is an act of humility. You have to admit you were wrong in some form or fashion in order to do it. And so when they will learn that their daddy is humble enough and cares about them enough in order to make things right with them, then again, they feel more valuable as human beings, which again, with raising girls, I certainly want to raise young women who feel valued.
Yeah, I had an experience this very morning, where I wish I'd had that apology framework.
Yeah.
My daughter had hit my son, and he got upset with her about that. She apologized. Well, she said she was sorry, but she didn't apologize in any kind of framework. And he was still upset with her. And so, he said, I acknowledge your apology, but I don't accept it. And so she was very upset that she didn't actually get to experience, like, she didn't actually get to apologize. And he didn't accept it. And it ended up being this really, really negative situation for everybody, because, obviously she'd done something wrong. He didn't feel like she had repaired it well enough, and so was still trying to punish her. She didn't feel that she was absolved in any way, or that, she got to make up for it. And so she was feeling punished and unhappy. And so it was all bad. But I think if we'd had the reflex that you were talking about, things might have turned out differently.
Well, and one of the things in that situation, because we have had kids say, I don't accept your apology.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, so you can say thank you for an apology. And the second thing, or the only things we taught after the fact, not on how to apologize initially. And that is that now we're working on grudge holding. And so the person who was not willing to grant their forgiveness, I may an hour later go and say, hey, you okay? Yeah, let's talk about what happened, because now they're typically going to be emotionally regulated again about an hour or so
Yeah.
later, right?
Yeah.
There's very
Yeah, that's
little very little things that rises to them staying mad for days at a time. So we'll give them a little bit of time to kind of settle and interact with them and say, hey, look, baby, we don't want to be the kind of people who hold grudges. And so, are you still unwilling to forgive your brother? No. Okay. Well, then I just need you to go and tell him, thanks for your apology, I forgive you. And so we've been able to work that in down the line, because I don't want
Yeah.
I don't want the person who's apologizing to have unrealistic expectations, and I certainly don't want the person who's
Right.
receiving the apology to be unrealistic about it, because sometimes forgiveness takes time. And
Yeah.
I can't predict how long it's going to take you to forgive, because everybody's different. Because, somebody lies to me, I'm like, don't lie to me. Somebody lies to my wife, it unsettles her. And so we all have different responses to human interaction. And so I don't want then the person who was harmed to feel like they're being held hostage until they
That's
say,
right.
I'm forgiven. So we've had to learn how to navigate
right.
that relationally. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, over time, that has turned out to be a really great thing in our home. And so, our business is called One Big Happy Home. My wife wanted it called that years ago. Before we even
Yeah.
had the business, we just had a blog, and she wanted to call One Big Happy Home because she wanted, 6 kids and peace. And so I told her recently that's the only time she's ever engaged in name it and claim it theology with the One Big Happy
Yeah.
Home.
Right.
Because all things considered, my house is not a place where it's absent of conflict, absent of struggles, but on balance, it is a place where people get along, where people love each other, work for each other, and so yeah, so maybe now it is a big happy home, not a conflict free home, not an
Yeah.
anxiety free home, but the overarching theme of our home is a place where people know they are loved and where they learn how to thrive.
Ryan, at the end of every Raising Men episode, I like to ask my guest to give me one operating principle, something, maybe a truth that you try to live or raise your children by, or just think is important. So I'll put you on the spot. Give me one operating principle.
I'm gonna combine two and say it in one sentence, so it feels like one operating principle.
Perfect. That's great.
Curiosity is a better mindset than judgment, because most people are doing the best they can, even if it doesn't look that way to you.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good one.
Because for the children, it's often a matter of skill, not a matter of will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't get mad at them for not being able to write their name yet.
You don't get mad at them because they can't run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds.
Right. And yet you'll get mad at them for not having really, really deep emotional skills that require a prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You have to, we as parents, we just have to remind ourselves about
Yeah.
that.
And I think the thing that's frustrating for me initially about my own behavior was that a lot of this is simple. But we choose to complicate it, because what we just talked about a minute ago, that's pretty simple, right? Yeah. I wouldn't yell at the kid for not being able to run 100 meters because I already know they can't. Yeah. But I assume that they have the full emotional spectrum and cognitive function of an adult.
Right.
Yeah.
When we as adults often fail to meet our own expectations with respect to that, and yet we're holding these children to this, it's insane.
It is insane. That's one of Ryan's self-governing principles. I will not require better behavior from an adult, myself included, than I will not require better behavior from a child than I will require from an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got 2 principles for the price of one. Right? Actually, we got 3.
Oh my gosh. I'm just going to put under my signature.
Ryan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. This has been a delightful conversation. I hope we can do it again sometime. I love how you remind us that that connection is primal, and that it's strong, and that it's steady, and it's what every boy
Yes.
needs from their parents. For anybody who wants to go deeper, please check out Ryan's work and the One Big Happy Home podcast. Their URL is onebighappyhome.com. The link is in the show notes. And this has been Raising Men. I'm Sean Dawson, and you are a great parent. Raising Men is produced by Fiel Hernandez. This episode was edited by Ralph Tolentino.